Welcome to the Candidates Forum for the Amherst School Committee, sponsored by the Amherst League of Women Voters in partnership with the Amherst Media. My name is Nancy Eddy, and I'm a member of the Amherst League. I will be moderating this forum. The mission of the League of Women Voters is to encourage citizen participation in government and influence policy through education and advocacy. We welcome every one of you to join us. This meeting is being recorded. The forum will be rebroadcast by Amherst Media and available for streaming. Please check their website for details. Election Day is November 2nd. Early in-person voting will be available during business hours from Monday through Friday of the preceding week, with evening hours on Thursday. Absentee ballots may be requested until October 27th. For more information, please visit the town clerk's website. If you have a question for the candidates, please type it into the Q&A box on your Zoom screen. We will only have time for 6 questions, so we apologize in advance if we do not get to yours. Remember that you can find more information about the candidates on Amherst Media and on the town's online bulletin board. In addition, the League will publish an election guide in the Amherst Bulletin the Friday before Election Day. The format for this session is as follows. There will be no opening statements. Each candidate will have 90 seconds to respond to each question. The section will end with a 2-minute closing statement from each candidate. So let's start with the first question. How do we ensure a smooth transition to the new grade configuration? We're starting with Peter Demling.
All right, lucky number 1. Hi, everybody, and thank you, League of Women Voters, Amherst Media. So first point to clarify is that this is not a done deal yet, the grade reconfiguration of moving 6th grade to the middle school. The Amherst School Committee the other week did vote to move to the region. Did move to the middle school pending a vote by the region to accept it. We discussed this at region for first time last meeting, and we will be discussing it again in another week and a half. Let's assume that it happens. How do we plan on the best transition? Well, so we've already done the biggest thing, which is we've delayed it until fall of 2023, which even though we have a significant space crunch at Fort River and Wildwood as a result of the COVID safety changes we made there and want to keep, we felt that the transition for students would be too rushed. And so this gives us time to plan. It gives us time to engage the community, families and staff to make sure that we design the best model. And I think the other thing, and I talked about this at the meeting, is that we need to be mindful of the first adopter cohort. You know, whenever we make a major change anywhere in the schools, there's always one class that is the first class, right? And so we need to be very mindful about providing supports for them in their transition from their previous home to their new home. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. Next, Benjamin Harrington.
Thank you. So I'll just get right to the point. Planning. We need very careful and thoughtful planning. I think we need to incorporate, all of the voices of our stakeholders. We definitely need input from our educators, right? We need to. These are the folks who are going to be responsible for making this transition smooth and making it, a positive experience for our students. The other thing I think we need to do is to start next year. We need to take the time to actually start preparing our 5th graders who are going to be 6th graders in a new building, potentially, if it goes that way. We need to start preparing them for that transition as well. And I think that's going to take a great deal of input from parents. So we're going to need to do some proactive outreach. We need to actually go out there and feel what people are thinking, address concerns as often as possible. It's not going to be easy necessarily, but we have to do everything that we can do to make it a positive experience for our students. That's all the time.
Thank you. Heather Lord.
Thank you. If this grade reconfiguration ends up happening, I think a couple of the points that were mentioned in terms of planning, input. I love the outreach to the community. We did one at the apartments where I live at, and 40 people almost this summer came out to speak. So if we could be in person at some of the different complexes and really get a lot of input. I don't know if there'd be teachers willing to move up to the middle school, but that could help with the transition. I know when Marks Meadow closed and my child went from Marks Meadow to Crocker Farm, there were 2 teachers, at least that she was familiar with that came, and it helped a lot. I also think if we had a few days for the new 6th graders to the first inaugural class to be in the building and sort of feel that ownership, that might help with the transition. And then definitely looking at curriculum. I know there's a lot of models in this country of middle schools that include 6th grade. I even went to one that included a 5th grade for a little while, 5 through 8. So that is all my time. That's all the time I'm going to use for now. Thank you.
Thank you, Heather. Allison McDonald, you're next.
Thank you. I think I would share the perspective of some of my the other candidates that have spoken already, in that it's fortunate that we have that additional year to really invest in proper planning and engagement with a wide group of stakeholders, and there are many. But I'm first going to refer us all to the hard work that the working group did. The middle grade span advisory board included educators from the middle school, as well as 6th grade teachers from both Amherst, Pelham, and I think Shutesbury schools, as well as parents and caregivers and staff, and worked really, really hard. And one of the components in that report includes a really thoughtful proposal of ideas for how to work through this transition or potential transition, including the development of an FAQ and guides, community informed guides for explaining that transition. The group also spent some time considering how we do transitions today from 6th grade to 7th grade. And so that work will also be really informative and helpful in planning that transition. But echoing some of the other themes, collaborative work between educators across our middle school and our elementary schools and administrators, and touching base with the community to get input and feedback from families along the way.
Thank you. Phoebe Miriam.
Thank you. I think that one of the first things to keep in mind is that we do have a sort of a large population of people who may not necessarily understand or may not be in support of moving 5th grade. I'm sorry, moving the 6th grade up. And so I think that we need to take some time to kind of figure out what are the core underlying issues, what are the concerns with it, because I think that's where we need to start the outreach and the education and the really having a comprehensive plan and idea about how to really handle the issues that have been raised and that will continue to be raised. I think it's hugely important to really listen to our community members. I think it's incredibly important to have teachers work with the community members to figure out what is best for their children in a transition like this. And I do think that we can learn something from transitions from, the 6th graders going into the way that we have it now, where the 7th graders are new 7th graders, and really take some of the positives of showing them the school early and things like that. Thanks.
Thank you. Jennifer Page.
Thank you, Nancy. I just first want to say thank you to the League of Women Voters for holding this event and to Amherst Media for broadcasting it. My name is Jennifer Page and I use she, her pronouns. So I think a critical thing to the success of a smooth transition to moving 6th graders to the middle school is engaging with families. Going out and talking to families where they are about what their concerns are, particularly the first 1 or 2 cohorts of kids who are going to be affected. We have to do more than simply hold listening sessions and ask for people to come and share their concerns. We have to go out and talk with folks where they are and find out what their concerns are, both families as well as school staff, who I'm sure will have some great ideas as to how we can make the transition as smooth as possible. there are always unintended consequences with a decision like this, things that we or that families didn't think of. In doing some door knocking for my campaign, I talked to a mom of a current 4th grader at Crocker Farm who was in favor of this move. She thought it would be fine for her kid. And I mentioned to her that next year when her child is in 5th grade, they're going to graduate from Crocker Farm at the same time as the 6th graders. And she said, oh, I didn't realize that. Like, she knew that her child might be within the first cohort, but it didn't occur to her that her child would be like graduating from elementary school. And these are just things that we need to make sure that we are communicating with families and that we're hearing from families about what their concerns are. I think there also might be something to be learned from Amherst's recent, sorry, I will stop there.
Thank you, Jennifer. Irv Rhodes.
Thank you. Any change and from long-standing traditions and routines and expectations comes with some anxiety and concerns. The move of the 6th grade to the middle school will be no different. The schools must deal with these in a very careful and thoughtful way. They must recognize that parents, teachers, and students will all have legitimate concerns and thus must prepare for them by having a robust community engagement program. Additionally, these programs must continue all the way up through the kids entering the middle school. This is big. This is big time for some of those 6th graders. You know, they were getting ready to be the big kids on the block, and now they're not going to. And that's big. And parents who have expectations of their kids graduating from the elementary school, now they're going to be gone. That tradition is gone. Those traditions are very important, and we really must pay careful attention to them. And I believe if we can make sure that we remain humane through this whole process with our kids, that we'll be all right.
Thank you all. Right on time for all of you. Thank you very much for staying within your time limits. The next question is, have you read through a full Amherst Elementary District and Regional District budget? How comfortable are you comparing proposed budgets with previous years and speaking up for changes as needed? And coming up first this time is Phoebe Merriam.
I have tried to go through the different budgets. I feel like this is an area where I have a lot of ideas, and I've noticed differences. I am trying to be really thoughtful about looking at projected budgets and then what actually happened. So I would say I'm comfortable going through them, and I think that when I go through them, it raises some questions for me that I always like to go back and try to understand how those decisions were made, what to spend where, what to cut where, all of those sorts of things. My hope is that we can continue to, use the budget to really care for, especially in these times, the social and emotional needs of our kids, make sure that we continue to incorporate or bring some back in some of the arts and music and tech stuff that has been shifted a little bit in the past year. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Next up is Peter Demling.
Okay, so multi-part question. So yes, I have read through a full elementary and regional school district budget. Did I understand it? Not all on the first pass. A lot of the full budget document is quite detailed and has some terminology that is difficult to understand. So, I certainly engaged our finance director and our superintendent try and understand that. And I will say, you know, after serving for 4.5 years in both Amherst and region, you know, I'm still learning that the structure of our budget, especially at the region, is difficult to understand. And so I think a big part of what I learned from my experience of reading budgets over the years is that a primary role in school committee is to try and explain the structure and the functioning of school committee budgets and finance in particular. You know, there are aspects of our budget in schools that are atypical from what you might see in a typical budget in a business. You know, we are very dependent on how the state funding levels come in. There are specific line items like the subject to appropriation line items for special education and for charter school reimbursement that we are very dependent on. And we're also very dependent on our local support. And so being able to communicate to the public that we are constrained by what we receive from the towns, that we do not have a large volume of discretionary spending, especially in a budget cut year, is something I think is an important role for school committee to communicate to the public.
Thank you. Jennifer Page.
Thank you. Yes, I have read through a whole school budget for the elementary and the region. I am a data analyst by trade, and I was a math major by training. I found it hard to read a budget on paper with columns in that way. I found myself really wanting to look at it in Excel so that I could make calculations and be able to better analyze the figures, especially comparing the current year to previous years. And so if elected, that is something that I will be recommending, since I didn't seem to be able to find an actual Excel version of the budget anywhere. The other question was, how comfortable are you comparing previous years and speaking up for changes as needed? I'm very comfortable comparing previous years. In fact, I think that having the context of previous years is really one of the major ways to understand a budget, is looking at this year compared to previous year and years before that as well. And I do feel very comfortable speaking up for changes. In fact, one of the reasons that I'm running for school committee is because I think that I am someone who will ask hard questions, who will question the way things have always been done, and who will challenge the school committee and the administration to consider what is being missed, or what opportunities are being missed, or whose voices are not being considered. And so I do feel very comfortable speaking up for needed changes. And I think that is something that we're going to be reckoning with as a school district in the years to come, as enrollments shift or decline, and as we have to deal with challenges regarding the budget.
Irv Rhodes.
Yes, I did take a deep dive into the budget. And if anyone wants to know, that's one of my strengths. Any time that I'm on any committee of any board, I always choose two of them. One is the finance committee, and the second one is the governance. The budget is the heartbeat of the organization. It really shows where our values are. The other thing is, when I looked at these budgets, is that I would recommend that all of you go to the fiscal 2020 budget and start there. And the reason for that is because that budget document is illustrative of the budget documents that one should see and be able to make sense of where we are and how we spend our money. Not only just money, but also the other human factors in that budget, such as enrollment, the charter school, special education, all across the board. And it really shows where we are as a school community. Me having served on the school, not only the school budgets committee, but also for the town. I was on the finance committee for the town, and also for the budget committee for the town. It is always important to understand and look at the budgets. One recommendation I would make is that the budgets be presented the way they used to be, starting with that 2020 document.
Thank you. Benjamin Harrington.
Yes, so I've definitely had to dig into the budgets and to elementary school budgets, right? Like it's pretty big part of our job. It's a third of what we do as school committee members. As far as comfortability with comparing previous budgets, I'll be honest, the only way I understood how our budget functioned was to go back and kind of do these comparisons and see what types of changes we made. It's a moral document, right? That's exactly what our budget is. It's a reflection of our values and the things that we hold dear, right? And so I'm absolutely comfortable in terms of speaking up for the things that we need to do as a district, right? We have this mission statement that we've made, right? Well, this is pretty much where we back that up, right? If we don't put our money where our mouth is, right? If we don't walk the talk, so to speak, then we're actually not meeting our moral commitment. And that is through the budget. So yes, I am comfortable with speaking up and definitely comfortable with comparing previous year's budgets. It pretty much gives us the narrative of where we're going from where we've been. I think that's very important.
Heather Lord.
Thank you. I have read through the full Amherst Elementary and Regional District budgets, actually more than once, because I found it really complicated, different how it's streamed, different language. And part of me thinks that's like a gatekeeping mechanism. Who has access to know about budgets in the classist and racist world that institutions are. So I've got myself on the budget subcommittee. I was like, okay, this is a really confusing document. And I, consider myself to be fairly smart. So I got on this budget subcommittee so I could have more time to really break it down. And then the next part that we've been talking about in our retreat is how do we do this for the community? How do we line it and make it really transparent and understandable and hold different training areas or have different videos so we understand what circuit breaker means and like line items, because I would love for more involvement in the budget. Absolutely, we have to compare proposed budgets with previous years and even projected years, because we do that as well in our budget meetings. And absolutely, if I'm not here to speak up for changes that the constituents, my people, or I believe in, what am I doing? Wasting your time. And that's not what I'm here for. Thank you.
Allison Mcdonald.
Thank you. Yes, I have read all of our budgets, top to bottom, and echoing what some of the other candidates have said, it's a slog. It's a real slog. We do not make it easy for school committee members or our community to understand what is in that budget. And it shouldn't be that challenging. So I echo also what Ms. Lord has said. It shouldn't take a finance degree or any advanced degree to be able to understand how the district is spending its money, our money. Some of the key things that I find really challenging for to wrap your brain around in that budget is the sources and uses of the funds. Where does the money come from? We have a variety of sources of money. And a lot of times the budgets that you see in the school committee meetings or in town council meetings is really only showing the appropriated money. So the money that's coming from taxpayers. That doesn't give a complete picture of how the spending is. And when you try to connect the dots, it looks like year over year, there's huge swings in spending when there really isn't, because it's accounting and sort of different grant funding and other sources of funding that are supporting our schools. And you really have to dig to be able to see that. The other challenge is that we use level services budgeting, which is really challenging for people to wrap their brains around.
Thank you. I want to remind the listening, watching public that you can raise a question to each of the candidates. If you put your question under what's called Q&A, it will be reviewed by the league questioners, and you may get a chance to have it asked. In the meantime, the next question is, how can we best deal with diversity, equity, and inclusion in hiring practices for staff, for curriculum, and for disciplinary actions? First up is Jennifer Page.
Okay, that's a big three-part question. How can we best, I'm sorry, I'm looking at it in the chat. How can we best deal with diversity, equity, and inclusion in hiring practices for staff, curriculum, and disciplinary actions? Gosh, that's quite a question. So first, I think that in terms of hiring practices for staff, I would like to see more proactive outreach to populations of potential staff members that that we may not have done before. So I would love to see proactive recruitment of diverse and people from different backgrounds for staff positions. Instead of just posting a job on School Spring, I would love to see a team that goes out and recruits people for staff positions. I'm going to skip curriculum for a second and talk about disciplinary actions. I think that this is a critical question for our district. I recently talked to a teacher about disciplinary equity in schools. And she said that, we think that in Amherst, we are very progressive and we wouldn't have the same problems with discipline disparities. But she said that Amherst is very similar to the country in terms of who gets disciplined in our schools. And it is more students of color who are disciplined. So that is a very important thing that we'll need to look at and that we will need to really ask ourselves and question the practices that are currently happening and what can be done about them. As for curriculum, I would love to see this question opened up to APEA and educators to see what ideas they have for how we can bring diversity, equity, and inclusion into our curriculum. Thank you.
Thank you. Heather Lord.
Yes, thank you. One of the things there has been some improvement in our hiring practices, and this is the first year we hired more staff and teachers of color than ever before. I also noticed that we've created like a para to teacher bridge program for our pairs of color. So we are doing a few things. They're getting in and they're working well. We can do more about retention. Like are people of color or differently abled working in a hostile environment? Are they feeling seen, heard? So we might, I'm not saying we are, that would be something that I would want to look at. Oh, but it doesn't say retention, but the more you retain, the less you need to hire. Curriculum, I also know that there's a group of people in our district working on anti-racism curriculum, and it's happening at the preschool level and all the way through the high school level. So maybe that could be expanded to include more community input around that. But I'm also very excited to see that starting to happen and not always as a deficit model for the minoritized individual. And then disciplinary actions, that's a button word for me, disciplinary actions. I wish we could switch that, like student who needs more care and more support, more love, because they didn't get enough sleep or they haven't eaten or they're really worried about what's going on in their family. So I would love for us to build upon the restorative justice program that's beginning again and expand that throughout the school and really be immersed in restorative justice practices. Thank you.
Thank you. Peter Demling.
Yeah, so three-part question here. So hiring practices, I really admire a lot of the work that our assistant superintendent in charge of diversity, equity, and human resources, Doreen Cunningham, has done over the years to every year increase the percentage of staff of color who have been hired. Last year was the first year where the majority of our hires were staff of color. I think a big part of that is the anti-bias hiring practices that she has instituted and matured, so that every person who is part of our evaluation committees and hiring committees and makes any hiring decision is required to go through that anti-bias training. As we know, simply rejecting racism in your heart is not enough to overcome racial bias in our minds. It's something we have to continually work at. And I think that principle has been well established and structured in our hiring practices. Curriculum, is about proactive review. Although I have to say, from the speaking to different history teachers at different grades, I've been very impressed with the level of thoughtfulness and awareness that they've had in the curriculum. And real quick on disciplinary actions, we get almost near universal support for wanting to expand the restorative justice program. We've been really hit by budget cuts. We cut over $1 million last year. So at the end of the day, a lot of this stuff comes down to advocating for full funding of our public schools at both the local and state level to support these programs. Thank you.
Thank you. Irv Rhodes.
Up until recently, when I looked at diversity, equity, and inclusion, I thought of it as a way that an organization would look at itself and also the things that it would do. I recently became the co-chair of the Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Committee of the Franklin, Hampshire United Way. And one of the things that I have now learned is this is more than it's a value. And if it's a value, It's something that you employ on a day-to-day basis. If you're going to employ it on a day-to-day basis, you want to be able to collect data in terms of where you are. So you have to have a way of assessing and have an assessment instrument and an assessment process to look at your entire organization through a DEI process. If you do not do that, then you're not able to evaluate on a day-to-day basis and a month-to-month or year-to-year basis as to where you are in terms of accomplishing the goals that you've set for your DEI programs. So I am, as part of the school committee, I would love to work in a collaborative way with each and every one of you to be able to look at every facet of our school system and school community through the eyes of diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Thank you. Benjamin Harrington.
Yeah, so I think there's a connection between all three, right? And that's culture, right? The culture that we show that we have in our schools makes all the difference in the world, right? So I'm very happy with the progress that we've made. What I think we can improve on is how we illustrate to the public that we value these people we bring in. It's not just a matter of checking off checklists, right? Like we have X amount of people of color that we bring in. Do we value their opinions, right? Are we showing that we care for these what they contribute to our overall culture, right? And so I think it's all about us. Again, I'm going to keep saying this all night, us walking the talk. We actually have to show these people that they matter to us, right? I kind of have a little bit of experience with this myself. And I think that when you have people who network with each other, right, there's this kind of stigma about coming here for a lot of folks of color. And I think we need to keep working on changing the atmosphere that extends into the curriculum, right? We need to look at our curriculum and constantly be analyzing it through an anti-racist lens. It's good that we're bringing in anti-racist curriculum. It's also important to correct where we have disparities within our curriculum or where we're supporting these differences. And as far as discipline, restorative practices, I think we need to start turning these disciplinary situations into educational moments. They are all teachable moments. That's what our children are there for.
Thank you. Allison Mcdonald.
Yep. I think the thing that comes to my mind is not just the great work that the district has been doing, but also the involving and bringing groups together to continue to ideate and generate those proposals for how we continue to advance and improve on diversity and equity. And I think connecting back to retention, hiring, and the increases in diversity in our hiring that we've seen in recent years is great, but inclusion is really is the measure, and the way we see that in the data. So back to some of the comments that other candidates have made is really in retention. And in order to support that retention, it takes that collaborative, constant checking, evaluating, and assessing of how we're doing, and not just from the school committee. It needs to be district-wide, in the building level, and with the community. And I think, thinking about sort of diversity in hiring and the different approaches, I think the proof is in the numbers and sort of what we're seeing. But I will also call out that when we started the Commandant's program, there was a concerted effort to go beyond just School Spring and reach out to other networks, including educators in other communities. So all of those three are linked together and takes a collaborative approach and consistent assessment and evaluation.
Thank you. Phoebe Miriam.
Thank you. So I think that first and foremost, that anytime you're thinking about diversity, equity, and inclusion, I think we have to be really, really thoughtful about how we are doing it. So how are we hiring in a way that sort of matches the community at large. So every student in our school deserves to be able to look up and see educators around them that come from the same place or look like they do or have similar backgrounds or beliefs. And so I think that we have to really think about how are we need to be, like Jennifer was saying, we need to be doing some recruiting. We need to really be looking at what are we offering. We need to be looking at, like other people have said, how are we retaining people? How are we caring for the people that we want to be educating our children? And we need to be asking those same people what's important, thoughtfully what's important in our curriculum to ensure that all of our students have access. And then we need to be training for those things so that we can ensure that all of that comes through in our schools.
Thank you. All right, question number 4. Anger and division is still present in the community over the previous elementary school building project. For those of you who are already members, what steps have you taken? And for those of you who are running for the office now, what steps will you take or would you take to heal that division and help the community move forward together on a current building project? Allison Mcdonald comes up first.
I will say for the current school committee, we've the listening forums, and this is actually the previous school committee, but many of us were around at that time when we submitted the application for the current building project. We embarked on an enormous amount of listening and data collection from the community to understand sort of what is the way forward and what is a solution that could get our kids into healthy learning environments, child-centered learning environments in a way that addresses both buildings. That was an extensive surveys in multiple languages, outreach and listening sessions. Fast forward to now, we are in the project. The elementary school building committee, of which 2 of our candidates are members of that committee, are working on that plan. And the school committee is going to be collaborating with the building committee on outreach. I've already been having conversations with the chair of the building committee on how we might approach that, the different ways that, whether it's joint meetings and jointly hosted forums and outreach. I've talked about wanting to expand on our in-person outreach in apartment neighborhoods and other ways to make sure that we're bringing the community along throughout the building project.
Thank you. Jennifer Page.
So yes, I think there is a lot of sadness and frustration over the previous building project. But from the people I've talked to, there's still a lot of disappointment out there. And I think that one way to heal is to look forward together to the future that's ahead of us, to look at the upcoming or the new school building project, and to make sure that I will make sure that I engage in active listening and genuine engagement with students and families about the big decisions that are ahead of us. I wouldn't want to see a repeat of what happened last time with the hurt feelings and the as you said, Nancy, the anger and the division that's still here. I think that if we can look forward to the future together, but in a way where we listen to each other, where we listen to and respect the differences of opinions that members will have, that the community members will have, and school committee members, that families will have. I think that if we can show, I think that I will work on showing that I will listen to differences of opinion And I will allow my mind to be changed. I will keep an open mind about the decisions that are before us, and I will actively listen and engage with community members. And I think that feeling that you're listened to and heard is one way to move towards healing.
Thank you. Irv Rhodes.
Well, if most of you might know or don't know, I was on that school building committee, that school, and it failed. So I still resonate with that hurt, because it was 18 months, not only my life, but the life of a lot of other people. And when I look back, we really didn't leave any stone unturned in terms of really engaging every section of the community in the process as we went along. I think that was probably the most talked about project ever, school project ever in this town's history. But I know one thing: you can't drive into the future while looking in the rearview mirror. So what I want to do is to look forward and think about and help and collaborate with all the other school committee members, and to ensure that we really reach and talk to each and every person in this community in relationship to how important this new school building is going to be and how it is going to be the heart of our school community. If I can say, if one thing sinks in, is that how to go out and connect emotionally with our constituents on this issue.
Thank you. Peter Demling.
Yeah, so I was elected the same day that the last building project had its last vote and failed. So certainly connected to this. The first thing that that I've done to heal divisions is right after I was elected, I reached out to individuals who were leaders of who opposed the project. I was a big supporter of it, just to talk to them and to see what they thought was the path forward. I spent a fair bit of time in emails doing the same thing. And I won't be Pollyannish. It didn't resolve all of our differences. It didn't create this kumbaya of healing, but I think it did help us understand each other. I think that was productive. I was also very active as vice chair of the school committee, working with our former chair Anastasia Ordonez, promoting the compromise proposal, the listening sessions that Ms. Mcdonald mentioned, that intentionally and specifically resolved the biggest points of contention of the previous project: the grade configuration and the size of the building. That compromise proposal is what led to our MSBA acceptance. The third thing I would say that is going to heal these divisions is the next building project passing. We don't all have to feel wonderful about each other and resolve all of our hurt feelings in order to do something very positive for our kids. I think the community understands this is a serious issue. There's a clear and urgent need. The building project is there, available for us now. We can work together and do this for our children. I think that's what's going to help us heal more than anything else.
Thank you. Heather Lord.
Thank you. I will admit that when I was appointed to the school committee, we were mid-pandemic, so I have not actually put a lot of effort or time into looking to heal this divide. Just got to be transparent with where I fall short. My whole campaign approach is to try to reduce harm, because I see that we're really divided as a town and even as a district in terms of our students. So I think one step would be slowing down to listen, to hear each other, finding ways to hold that person in some kind, because there's a lot of harm. And I'm not saying traumatize yourself, but okay, so right now I'm on the school committee with a few people that we have very divergent ideas, like really, that could cause us to go to war. But we found a way to disagree with respect. We haven't had, we're like, okay, you want MCAS, we need an assessment. I don't want MCAS. What do? We follow what the state tells us. But so I think we just need to really listen. I was a no on the school committee building. I couldn't get my answer that I needed to know that equity and justice would reign even years later. And now I'm yellow, so I need to hurry. So yes, I will be more, if I get elected, when I get elected, I will be more proactive in working towards healing this hurt. I have sat down with some people from District 5 about this. Thank you.
Phoebe Miriam.
Thank you. So I think that I think we need to start with kind of owning where we are. And I think that this question helps us do that. I think that there's a piece of ownership that we need to come together and say, look, this was very harmful across our community. And we need to make some assurances, I think, both as a school committee and the school building committee, that that the concerns that a population of our community have are going to be heard and going to be answered. I think that we really have to do significant work to bring people into the room so that we're going and explaining what all of these things mean, so that we're getting, we have the opportunity to hear the concerns and hear the questions and hear sort of the hurt and figure out ways to move forward from there. We need to ask open questions, not leading questions. We can't assume that we know what a certain population or community is going to feel about a project like this. And we really need to show that we can take action and get questions answered thoughtfully and with purpose. And until we can do that, I don't know how else to bridge that divide.
And finally, Benjamin Harrington.
So I'm going to horribly paraphrase a Maya Angelou quote. People will forget what you said. People will forget what you did, but they will remember how you made them feel. I've taken that to heart. I don't know that I was necessarily super happy with how, like, say, the charter debate, the charter division turned out, which was a result of that division kind of came from the school building situation in there. What I've done is I've had awkward, difficult conversations with people in order to meet them where they are. People that I vehemently disagreed with at one point, I've found, and I've done the work. It's not easy. It is so difficult to bridge that gap. And I've committed myself to that, to doing that, reaching out to people who I previously didn't agree with, because I believe that the end result is what's most important. And you have to work, no matter how hard it is, you have to work to build that bridge. We won't build that school without building these bridges. That's what we need to do. And what else I've done is to continually sort of, I guess, reject an adherence to furthering those divides, right? That's all that I've been about this entire election cycle, is trying to actually see where people are, right? Listen to them, allow them to understand that I am listening to them, and then continue to just work on bridging those gaps everywhere I can. It's not easy. It's not necessarily, it's not something you jump up and want to do, but we have to do that work in order to get a new school building built.
Thank you all. The fifth question is, what are the next steps for the public schools towards achieving Amherst greenhouse gas reduction goals of 25% by 2025? And up first is Heather Lord.
Thank you. I know that what came before us this year was to vote on solar panels parking, so that we could draw some of the energy from the solar panels in the parking lot. That is one way. I think with the renovations that we've had to do because of the pandemic, COVID, some of the air filtration upgrades will definitely make less of a carbon footprint, uses less energy. And we need to continue to research. I mean, okay, yes, this new building is going to be built in a more sustainable way, and it's going to have a lot of an impact on getting to that 25% that we're looking to do. I feel like we'll get there. So I'm like, well, let's go to 30, let's go to 35. But yes, so I think we just keep on talking to the experts, keep on doing the best next step we can to be as sustainable and as green as we can, and we will get there. Thank you.
Thank you. Allison Mcdonald.
couldn't find my mute button. The elementary school building is the single biggest impact that we can have on reducing greenhouse gases. So when that is built, it will be subject to our net zero bylaws. So it will be a significant improvement versus our current two buildings that we have in our elementary schools. We're investing in the feasibility studies to be able to upgrade the roof and consider upgrading it so that it can sustain solar panels, other options to be explored. I think the one that we keep coming up against is in transportation, and that there's significant opportunities in transportation. That will require us pulling together a task force to examine that and really look at that. Electric buses are great. They're not the answer to really reducing the greenhouse gases from our transportation, because of the distances that our buses have to travel and the demands that we make on our buses on a day-to-day basis, and the length of time it takes to recharge them. So looking at other ways, such as bus routes that minimize mileage, looking at ways to encourage more families to use the free bus transportation service, because if every family used a bus instead of a personal vehicle to drive their kids to school, it would save a lot more than electric buses.
Thank you. Benjamin Harrington.
Yeah, so I'm kind of like an M&O geek, like maintenance and operation. Those are the sorts of things that I think about. And when I think about like reducing, our greenhouse gas emissions, I think about like how we like heat our buildings and these sorts of things, and how much loss we deal with due to an imperfect envelope in every building, right? We can look at Fort River. I don't have to tell anybody about the roof there, or the middle school roof, right? These sorts of things cause our system to work that much harder. And so the fossil fuels that we're burning as we heat our buildings and cool our buildings, right? We actually expel a lot of fossil fuels there. The amount that we use has a lot to do with how much energy we waste consistently. And I think we need to think about these sorts of things when we're making plans. Yes, we need to spend more money on maintenance and operations, but we need to do that wisely, and we need to do that from a green perspective, if you will, right? Like we need to think about how every dime that we put into our schools, be it the buildings themselves, the vehicles, all of these things, we need to start thinking efficiently and effectively about how we are impacting the entire world around us, right? Like we can talk about idling times for buses. We can talk about routes for buses and all of these sorts of things. We need to explore looking at solar canopies where they're feasible, right? It's not the easiest thing. We're talking about like a wind sail, right? So we need to do these things safely and smartly, so that going forward, we don't leave these problems to our children. And also, the way we approach the new school building project will absolutely impact our green footprint.
Thank you. Phoebe Miriam.
So I think everybody's on board with that, of course, whatever the school building project looks like, that is a sort of the single biggest impact we can make. I think that there is something to be said for looking at our transportation. So I honestly don't know, Allison was, electric buses may not be the way to go, but we have a number of vans. So let's look at those. Let's look at if it's possible to, as we acquire new vehicles, what can we do to make them more green? I think that any project that is done, any roofs that are put on, any maintenance projects that have to happen, have to be looked at through the lens of how can we make this more green? How can we make things more sustainable? And I think that just by ensuring that we are looking for those better options, I think right off the bat we can probably find ways that are relatively easy, or maybe I should say not easy, but simpler to do, that can ultimately help us meet that goal.
Thank you. Peter Demling.
Yeah, so of course, pass the building project is number one, like everybody has said. But let's not forget our middle school and our high school are also quite old and in need of significant repair and nowhere near net zero. And Crocker Farm also has significant issues long term for its infrastructure. So I've been on JCPC, the town's capital allocation board, advocating for increased funding to the schools, and I think we can increase that. But the town has its own financial constraints, and you can only squeeze so much blood from a stone. I think all of us want all of our buildings to be net zero tomorrow. It's a matter of resources. So I'm going to turn this question around and say that the voters need to do two things. One is evaluate your town council candidates and vote town council candidates that are going to support an expansion of our revenue base. Because without an expansion of our revenue base, we can't increase services and achieve these very aggressive but proper climate goals that we want. And number two, next November is the Fair Share Amendment, which is going to be an extra 4% on taxed on incomes above $1 million, constitutional amendment from Massachusetts, with that estimated $2 billion in revenue raised dedicated to public schools and to infrastructure. Okay, there's no way that we're going to make the middle school and the high school anywhere close to net zero anytime soon without a significant increase in aid that has to happen at both the local and at the state levels. So vote for the Fair Share Amendment and vote in the town council election.
Thank you. Irv Rhodes.
I feel like I'm coming here from the future with this, with these comments, but I've spent a great deal of my life as a capital formation consultant with startups around the country. And as a result of that, I've gotten to look at what's coming at us in the future. I believe that 25% is really doable. When we start thinking about retrofitting buildings and school buses that can't do what they need to do because of batteries, I know that what's coming at us in terms of a 5-year horizon, that 25% will be easily met. And the costs, yes, will be there, but if I'm correct, those costs will not be as substantial as we think they would be, given the technology that is available. One example, solid state battery being retrofitted into the school buses would not require the kind of recharging that we have right now. And they could go for 13, 14, 1,500 miles or more without recharging. That's coming. So I'm optimistic about that. But in the meantime, we have to deal with the reality. And that reality is that it does take some funding. So I agree with Peter. We must increase the amount of funding we have available to deal with what we have right now. But the future is going to take care of itself in terms of the technology that's coming down the pipe.
Thank you. Jennifer Page.
So I think in the big picture, it will be important for us to evaluate all capital investments through the lens of climate resilience and reducing carbon emissions, and that we need to prioritize investments that will help the town meet those climate goals. In the short term, things like solar panels on the middle school roof, or doing a study of having solar on our parking lots could go a long way towards meeting those goals. I think we have a great untapped resource in our town when it comes to making decisions and generating ideas, and that is our students. Amherst Sunrise is a high school group that is doing some great work. They're a very active and engaged group of high school students that have organized to combat climate change and to fight for climate resilience. And I think that if we can engage students, they're the ones who go to the buildings every day and ride the bus every day. I think if we can engage students and find out what their ideas are, I think there's a great untapped resource there. In addition, I think that another resource in our town is the ECAC, the Energy and Climate Action Committee. We could look to them for guidance on how best to use the school's capital funds with an eye towards climate resilience. And I agree with what others have said about our transportation. Is there a way to look into replacing buses that are going to go out of service with hybrid buses? And is there a way to encourage more families to take buses? Or if families aren't going to take the bus, and if they're going to opt out, is there a way to look at reconfiguring our bus routes to make them more efficient and to have fewer buses on the road for less amount of time?
Thank you. And let's take a final question. What do you see as the primary reasons for the declining enrollment in both the elementary and the regional school districts? And what steps would you advocate taking to increase enrollment in the Amherst Public Schools? And that goes first to Irv Rhodes.
Well, I'm glad you asked that question, because in the last 3 years, the decline in enrollment has been flat. We haven't had a decline in enrollment. And I looked at those figures today, and it was rather astonishing that in the last 3 years, we've had, say, from 2018 to 2020, we had a decline in enrollment of 7 students at the high school level. And at the elementary level, we had a decline in students of 5 from 2016 to 2020 of 5 students. So that decline in enrollment has not been as steep as some have mentioned. However, when you look back over to say the last, I think, 8 to 10 years, there has been a loss, a significant loss. We would look at it as a statistical loss of students, and in terms of that decline. The question is where and where are those students going? What is causing the decline? And is it something that is really worrisome that we need to pay particular attention to? One thing for sure is that we have lost students to the charter schools, and that sucks a lot of money out of our school system. We know that for a fact. We also know that we also retain a lot of special ed students in our enrollment, and that is something we have to look at. Man, I wish I had a bit more time, but I don't.
Thanks. Phoebe Miriam.
So I've actually talked about this some with people recently, and there seems to be an idea that many people believe, I think, that the charter schools are a significant piece of that. And I think that we can't, we have to keep in mind that we can't control what is right for individual families, of course. And so I think that we have to really do some work about why families are making that choice as opposed to staying in the Amherst school systems. I think that there's a lot of, I think we're doing a better job about bringing in, looking at diversity and equity and inclusion and all of that. But I think that there's a long way to go. And I think that some of the reasons why people leaving have to do with thinking that they're in a community that is diverse and that there's equity, and then not finding that they have some of those opportunities that they anticipated that their family was going to have. And so I think a lot of it is outreach, figuring that out, and then implementing those things that people really need to see, and making a point of ensuring that every student is really getting what they need within our community so they don't have to look outside of it. Thank you.
Thank you. Allison Mcdonald.
So there's a couple things that are really contributing to declining enrollment and over years. And one is population shift simply. And there are some things that the town can do to impact that, but less the school committee. So as there's fewer younger families with children in the towns, then there's fewer students that are addressable, if you will say, that could potentially enroll in our schools. But the bigger, the one that is sort of within our addressable as a school committee is the competition with the charters, which others have mentioned as well. And part of that definitely has a financial impact. But when you think purely about an enrollment perspective and the choices that parents are making for where to send their schools, it comes down to the programming and the services that our schools are offering for their children that meet the needs of their children and their family, and the funding and the commitment from the school community, as well as the town and district and region, to support that programming. So programs like the Caminantes dual language program that we implemented in the elementary schools has reversed the decline in enrollment within the Fort River district, and parents are choosing the school. Programs such as the Seal of Biliteracy, our arts and extensive electives offerings that both enrich and also prepare students for careers beyond alternative pathways other than college. Those are all ways, but it requires funding and commitment and support from our school community and our town in order to be able to continue those.
Thank you. Heather Lord.
Thank you. One reason that I want to bring up that I don't think has been mentioned yet is the housing availability and the pricing increase. When I was a child growing up here, there were more apartment complexes that offered low income housing because they had the federal loan, but once they stopped having to pay that off, like Puffton Village I'm talking about, then there's no low income housing. And I live in low income housing, and I really could not afford it if I weren't supplemented with a voucher. So even low income housing for a 2-bedroom around $1,400, that's not low income housing. So that is something nationally, by the state and locally, we need to figure out. Because more homelessness, it's just not okay. Another thing I think is the racism and the oppression, whatever the kind of the oppression is. I know a lot of parents who pull their kids to homeschool or find alternate programs when they bring an issue to the teacher or the principal, and they don't feel satisfied that their children will not have to go through that again. So what ways can we listen differently, maybe continue to grow in our practices where we're not disproportionately disciplining certain students. So the two things everybody else brought up, yes, too, but the housing and the oppression. Thank you.
Thank you. Jennifer Page.
So I think the primary reasons for declining enrollment are demographic shifts and reduction in births, and we're seeing this throughout all of Western Massachusetts, but specifically to Amherst, as Ms. Lord has just said, a lack of housing for families due to single family homes being bought up by investors, so to rent to students. So university students, that is, of course. So I would advocate for voting for town council candidates who will advocate for and create more affordable housing in Amherst. So that more families can move to our town and can afford to live here. I think we also see competition from charter schools. And I would advocate for conducting exit interviews of families who do pull their students out of ARPS for whether it's for charter schools or homeschooling or school choice, to find out why. I don't know that we really have a good grasp on why families leave our district, and doing exit interviews might not bring those families back, but it will give us an idea of why families are leaving and what we can do about it to prevent more declines in the future. I think that the MSBA has actually predicted that enrollment is going to increase in the next few years. So whether we see that in Amherst remains to be seen. But I think that we need to take a hard look and talk to families who have felt not served by the Amherst schools and find out why they're leaving and what we can do to prevent more families from leaving in the future.
Thank you. Benjamin Harrington.
Yeah, I have to completely and totally agree with the assessment of available housing, right? Like I've watched the residents change, and I live in a complex that just got bought out, right? And you can see the changes overnight, right? Who they're catering to, and it's not families like me. It's not single parents like me or anything like that, right? So that is a problem. We need to advocate for more affordable housing, right? We need to champion that, right? But that's not within the purview of us necessarily. I think we all need to be doing that as a town, right? And supporting that movement. Another thing I have to agree with Hala and kind of sort of add on to it, that there is abject racism that occurs as well as classism. And we don't talk about the classism at all. We hear people talk about racism consistently, but one of the things that I hear from folks outside of the district, I have a lot of friends who teach outside of here, and that's exactly what their assessment of us is. We need to do a lot to change that, right? in the areas where it's actually true that we are sort of looking down on certain folks who find the reason to exit this area to a place where they're more appreciated or feel more appreciated and welcome, right? We actually also do need to champion the things that we get right? I don't think that a lot of folks understand what the demographics are in our schools. I talk to people and they don't understand that we are greater than 50% non-white and that we have a faculty and staff that matches that. I think we need to champion the positives is what we need to do. Accentuate the positives, eliminate the negatives. I heard that in a song somewhere.
Thank you. Peter Demling.
Yeah, advantage of going last or next to last is that all the good stuff is already said, right? So I would just plus one a lot of the things that said, especially what Mr. Harrington just said about accentuating the positives. You know, we lost our communications director years ago because of budget cuts. And so there is a lot of amazing things about our schools that that new families don't know, or families that leave at a certain grade aren't aware of. Talked about charter schools and what we can do to stem that and enrollment. So we have done surveys of parents who have left for charter or for private schools. What we found, one of the things we found is that, you know, most parents didn't do a thorough in-depth evaluation and understanding of what we offer versus the private or charter and then do a cost benefit. It was a decision for a number of different reasons. So there's no one answer. Nobody knows exactly where enrollment is going. So what I think we need to do specifically with the charter school question is stop the funding death spiral that can happen. Because when charter flow goes out, we lose that money. The inequitable charter funding formula undercuts our budget, which means we have to cut more services, which means we lose more students because we have fewer services and the charter schools are more attractive. You know, we spend over $3 million a year in charter school funding. That could go up to $4.5 million a year before we hit the cap. And so we need to stop charter school expansions that I've been very involved in, and we need to work with our state representatives who understand that the charter school formula needs to be reformed as well. Thank you.
Thank you. And thank you all for your answers to 6 questions. I'm sorry that we can't bring in more questions from the listening public, but you will have other opportunities, I know, to find out where each of these candidates stands. So we're now ready for the candidates' closing statements. They each have 2 minutes to make a closing statement. And first up is Benjamin Harrington.
Yeah, so to summarize, I'm running for re-election because I represent a very diverse group of folks who don't necessarily have their voices heard at the table every day. I'm not just talking about like ethnic diversity. Yes, I am BIPOC, specifically Black. Yes, I do represent that aspect of me. I'm also a blue collar worker, and I'm proud of that fact, right? We don't hear enough from folks like me in that regard. We don't hear enough from folks who are single parents. And we hear a lot of people talk about how they're going to represent people like that, but it's different when you've experienced it and lived it, right? I also live around folks, I'm just going to keep on this theme here, around folks who feel that their voices aren't heard every day and that ask me every day to speak for them. I want to continue doing that. I also want to continue representing the rest of our stakeholders within the Amherst Regional Public Schools and Amherst Public Schools, right? I think that I have exhibited the fact that I am very collaboratively minded and that I can work with folks across any divides, regardless of the issue, and that I am perseverant when it comes to doing those sorts of things, making those connections. I believe in our school system, and I believe in our ability to actually continue to evolve. I think that's very important. So I humbly ask that you vote for me on November 2nd, Benjamin Harrington. And you can go to my website and get more information about me, www.benjaminharrington.com. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harrington. Irv Rhodes.
I'm really extremely grateful for the opportunity to appear in this forum. And I'm really grateful to the League of Women Voters. It's an outstanding example of community service that I hold as a model for all of us. And so I really want to thank you all for doing this. I am Irv Rhodes. I am an experienced member of this town. I've lived here for more than 40 years. I love this town. I am committed to this town. And as one person said when I started to teach, if you don't like kids, you shouldn't teach. I love kids. I love kids. I've been a school teacher, an elementary school teacher. I've taught third. I taught a third through fourth and fifth grade combination. I've been a teacher of teachers. I've been on many boards and committees here in town. I thoroughly am immersed in this town, into everything it is. I'm thoroughly immersed into the school system in terms of how it operates, its budgets. I really, on a day-to-day basis, feel the heartbeat of this town. When I see kids walking in the streets, I feel so incredibly grateful that I live here. I feel incredibly, unbelievably devoted to being a member of this town and being a contributing member of this town. I want to, by my membership on this school committee, to be able to make a positive contribution. And my pledge is to work collaboratively with all of you so that we have the best of all of us in this shown in this school system. We are Amherst. We are who we are, and we're stronger together rather than apart.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. Phoebe Miriam.
First, I want to thank the Amherst League of Women Voters for hosting this and for allowing me the opportunity to participate in this forum, and thank all of my fellow candidates. You guys are all amazing, truly. As a graduate of the Amherst Public School Systems and the mother of 3 children who are currently in our school systems, I really believe that this is one of the most important positions in our town. We are all together fierce about our schools, fierce about our children, and that is shown in every answer that everybody's given today. Being on the building committee has been an experience that's really helped me realize why we need more diversity in our governing bodies, why we need different voices in the room so that we can gain the multiple perspectives that a wide variety of people bring. We need a school committee that looks like, sounds like, and can relate to the different populations that make up our town. I intend to bring more transparency to the inner workings of the school committee, to the issues that have an impact on everybody within our school system. We need to use our resources to really reach a wider range of parents and families so that we can advocate for every single child, every family, those that currently know that they have a voice and that they can have a voice, but especially for those that don't know that have historically felt like they have no voice or say, or those that don't know how to have a voice, that need the encouragement to come forward. And I've already said it, but we need to ask more questions, open-ended questions, not leading questions or questions that we think will get the outcome that we want. And my intention on hopefully being on school committee is to do just that. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Miriam. Jennifer Page.
Thank you. And thank you again to the League of Women Voters Amherst for holding this forum tonight. I'm running for school committee because I envision a school district that is truly committed to supporting every student to reach their potential. I'm the parent of a student at Amherst Regional Middle School, and I've lived in Amherst for 13 years. As a school committee member, I will ask hard questions and I will speak up about what is being omitted or ignored. And I will respect and seek out voices who express a concern about a decision that needs to be made. For example, many families are concerned about the decision that was recently made to move 6th graders to the middle school. These concerns are legitimate and important, and they need to be addressed in a collaborative way between the administration, school staff, and families. We shouldn't simply ask families to trust elected officials and school leaders. Trust has to be earned through mutual respect and empowerment. Trust is not something that elected or appointed officials are entitled to just by the nature of their position. I will work to earn this community's trust. I've been on my own journey of awareness of my identity as an Asian American woman, as the daughter of immigrants, as a non-Black person of color, and as a non-white person who nonetheless benefits from white privilege. I am firmly committed to looking at all issues with an equity lens. This includes things like noticing when a board or committee includes no or few non-white people, making an event more accessible for attendees who are speakers of other languages, and considering other obstacles to participation. But I know that I can't speak for all marginalized groups and that my lens will always be flawed. So I proactively seek out the perspectives of people who are not like me, people who can help me see things differently and can bring to bear their own expertise and life experiences. I will always be evolving and learning, and I'm looking forward to listening to and learning more from the Amherst community. Please vote for me for greater democracy and transparency in decision-making and more proactive community engagement. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Page. Allison Mcdonald.
Thank you. Thanks to the League of Women Voters and to Amherst Media for sponsoring this event tonight. I'd like to talk about 3 things: taking action based on learning, hard work, and solutions. In the intense months of the last school year, we learned that many of our processes or approaches in school committee needed updating. I've taken that learning and have been working to do that updating. We expanded the ways in which the public can participate in our meetings and updated policy so these continue for both in-person and virtual meetings. We've changed our tools for managing meetings and documents to make it easier for the public to find and access important material. And we've been working since August on updating our budget process and approach so that we can better communicate with and engage the community in next year's budget development. None of this is flashy headline grabbing work. It's hard work, and it takes dedication and hours of time every week, not just in meetings, but in reading, learning, preparing, in listening and talking to caregivers, staff, and administrators, and listening to the perspectives and respecting the opinions of my colleagues. When people talk about the status quo, it suggests a monolith or single opinion. The group of us that are seeking to return to service on school committee are anything but that. I and my colleagues come to each of our discussions and decisions from different perspectives, and I always come with a willingness to listen and be moved by what my colleagues have to say. As chair of both committees, I work hard to make sure every voice is heard and every member weighs in on decisions. Because the work of a governing body like the school committee is not about positions and platforms. It's about investing the time and care to deeply understand the work. It's about opening ourselves up to the perspectives of others and coming together to seek solutions that advance the mission of our schools. Solutions that ensure our students all have healthy learning environments, solutions that ensure we have funding to support the high quality services our schools provide, and budgets that align with community priorities. I've been doing that work for 3 years on the school committee, and with your vote on November 2nd, I will continue to do work for our kids, our teachers and staff, and for our community. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. McDonald. Peter Demling.
So thanks again to the League and Amherst Media, and especially to my fellow candidates, because running for public office in Amherst is hard. It's harder than it should be. And if we want the best for our kids, we need to welcome and encourage anyone who wants to run. So thank you. As for myself, I'm running for re-election because I believe in public schools. I believe in their mission to provide all children equal access to the highest quality education, regardless of background or ability, while supporting their personal growth and overall well-being. I'm fortunate to have served 4.5 years on the committee with a dedicated group of kind and thoughtful colleagues who have contributed in different but complementary ways. A big focus of mine has been advocating for school funding at both the local and state levels, because everything that we value in our schools, everything that we do is undermined when we underfund our budget. To that end, I've authored a resolution calling on the state to fully fund COVID costs, which was then passed by more than 170 other school committees. I've organized local advocates and testified to the State Board of Education multiple times to successfully prevent multiple charter school expansions. And I've worked with Senator Comerford and other state officials to prevent a change to charter school reimbursements that would have cost our districts $580,000 in FY20 alone. I've also advocated on issues beyond budget, including a resolution to the UMass Chancellor for stricter enforcement of COVID safety rules for students, and a resolution to state officials to suspend MCAS and explore alternative assessments. And I've consistently called for replacing both Fort River and Wildwood as soon as possible. And much work remains to be done. I'm thankful to live in a diverse community with strong social values and excellent support for public schools. I would be grateful for the chance to serve again. I hope I've earned your vote. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Demling. Heather Lord.
Thank you. Thank you to the League of Women Voters and Amherst Media, and thank you to everyone for watching this. I look to continue to advance equity in practice, in policy, and in presence in our district throughout engagement with the students, staffs, family, administrators, unions, and the community. I would like to especially increase involvement through seeking out and listening to and amplifying the voices of those who have historically been underserved, silenced, and marginalized by our institutions. Are we an accessible and representative district? Those 2 points, accessibility and representation, to me are wrapped up in impacted by equity, which I want it to be the umbrella from which all our work stems from, the lens from which we look at everything. We need to continually do honest assessments of our policies. Are they grounded in equity and justice? We need to evaluate our practices. Do we use classroom management skills that disproportionately impact a certain demographic? And we need to analyze our presence. Can our students see themselves reflected in any of the adults in the building? As we navigate the changing landscapes from COVID-19 and the increase in anxiety, depression, and PTSD, I feel like I'm well suited with my past as a teacher and my present as a licensed social worker to go beyond the administrative duties that are required on the school committee and work towards the healing that I feel is imperative. I'll take my last 37 seconds to mention that I'm wearing red for the missing women, girls, and two-spirited Indigenous people. As of 2016, there were almost 6,000 reported, and the black is for the Black people that have gone missing. In 2020, the total was reported well over 200,000. This awareness is important on school committee because some of our families are harmed and really impacted when they see who gets the media attention and urgency when they go missing versus not. It's another punch for Our Lives Don't Matter. So if elected, I will continue to serve from a heart-centered and informed space, working to improve our district. Thank you for your consideration and possible vote.
Thank you, Ms. Lord. I want to thank all of the candidates, not only for participating in tonight's forum, but especially for your clear and obvious devotion to the Amherst School Committee, the Amherst school system, to the children who the committee serves and the children who we all cherish. And I especially thank you for your being willing to represent the citizens of all of Amherst in our local government. To those of you watching, remember to visit Amherst Media to view the candidates' short presentations there and to look for their statements on the town bulletin board. And be sure to pick up a copy of the Amherst Bulletin on the Friday before Election Day for the League's election guide. And don't forget to vote. Good night and thank you.